lot of questions on this one because there's so much to go into. So we will start off first though with some introductions. And for those of you who don't know me, if I haven't worked with most of you at this point, my name's Lydia. I direct our leasing team at Nest and have been with Nest for about 6 years now. And so I'm very much involved with our marketing and also all things special housing, whether that is rental assistance or inclusionary zoning, affordable dwelling. It's all kind of stuff that I try to specialize a little bit in for us, because that is all very complicated in this city, if you don't already know. And Quentin, pass it to you.
My name is Quentin West. I'm a senior leasing specialist on the leasing team. I joined Nest earlier this year. Prior to joining Nest, I worked for another property management company in the city, and I'm also a licensed realtor in Maryland. So really excited to be able to speak with you all today on this topic. It's something that is very important to me, and I'm hoping that I can continue to learn and share what I learn with you all. Thank you. And I'll pass to Mercedes.
Hi, my name is Mercedes Lamp. I'm the executive director of my sister's place. I have been in this position for 3 years, and we have, we're a domestic violence organization. We have a shelter where we house families who are in an emergency need, and that's usually 3 to 6 months, sometimes longer. And our aim is to get these families into a position where they can move on to transitional housing, whether that be ours or somebody else's. And we do have a couple of transitional housing programs that I will go into detail later.
Thank you, Mercedes, and thank you for joining us, because I think it's always good to not just hear from us, but hear from folks in the community who have been doing related work way longer than we have. So that is really great experience to hear from. And we're going to go through, just touch on DC programs a little bit as an overview, and then really go into the process, because I think that's where there's the most questions. It's just, how does it work and how to be prepared as an owner for working with these types of programs and vouchers, and what Nest's role is when going through that process, and then why it works and how being involved and participating in this program overall helps DC residents work towards equity, and what the benefits are to you as the homeowner as well, because there definitely are a few. And I will pass it over to Quentin for an overview of what is a housing voucher.
So a housing voucher is essentially a rental assistance or rental subsidy that takes into account a person's need, their income, family size, and the neighborhood that they're moving to. And sometimes vouchers can cover the security deposit as well as the full cost of the rent, or sometimes they only subsidize a portion of that rent and the tenant is responsible for the remainder. And as Mercedes mentioned, a lot of these programs are meant to be a pathway to self-sufficiency. So taking someone who's in a very unstable situation and giving them a bit of stability so that their case managers can then work with them to find sustainable employment, so that they can then be responsible for rent on their own in the future. And then sometimes there are longer term programs where people can be in a voucher program for years. So it really just depends on the type of program that they're in. And then there are also many nonprofits like My Sister's Place and several others throughout the city that offer rapid rehousing programs, which is an emergency housing program. So people who are in emergency situations can be placed sometimes a lot more quickly than your typical HCVP program, and they're able to get into transitional housing or something that's not necessarily deemed to be longer term. So a year or something like that, so that they can just get a little bit of stability in order to transition into the next phase of their housing. And then just a note on fair housing here. So source of income, there are several protected classes in DC as it relates to housing discrimination. And source of income is a protected class. So something that we do at Nest is include in all of our listings the verbiage above here, where we happily accept applicants whose rent is paid either in part or in full via rental housing assistance provided by the district or federal government. And that's not only to comply with the legislative mandate, but it's also to let rental assistance applicants know that, you know, we want them to apply and we want to work with them in order to find housing for them. So I think that we've done a very good job in doing that and been pretty successful since I've been here. So.
And this is where we'll go over the process. And I'm happy to take any questions if anybody wants to interrupt with questions. Esther's gonna shoot them to me so I can answer them for everyone. But the 5 main steps we see are these right here. It can be a bit of a longer process to get somebody from the application point to the move-in point when we're working with rental assistance, because there's just so much more paperwork. There's a lot of people involved. There's an inspection. I would say the goal is that it doesn't take longer than 30 days, but we have had times where it takes closer to 2 months for whatever reason. Unfortunately, as quickly as Nest works, and if you've had us rent a property for you, you know, we're pretty quick in our communication and really want to move things along quickly. With these, we really have to slow down and do a lot of follow up with, usually with the city, because they just, you know, it's a bureaucracy, it's a whole thing. But we start with the application process, and it is the same as with any other Nest applicant. So they're going to have to meet the same requirements, taking into account that when we're looking at income, we're looking at their voucher and what is getting paid on their behalf. So they're still going through a credit history check. They're going through a rental history check. If they have history, oftentimes they don't, depending on what situation they're coming out of or how old they are. And they are still potentially providing proof of income if the program deems that they're responsible for a portion of the rent. So there are definitely plenty of folks we work with who they do have employment. It's just not enough to cover a full home for their family. So, you know, to help them towards that pathway of self-sufficiency, the program is still saying, hey, you have to pay something. We want you to get practice with this, build up your credit. And so we make sure that they can cover that. Usually they'll be paying for utilities as well. So we're gonna check them out, make sure everything looks good. And then knowing that they've got that really solid income that is not going anywhere because it's coming straight from the city to our bank account, AKA yours. And that is not something you need to worry about. Once we fill out that packet, and that does require you to provide more information than you'd normally provide. So we are asking owners for an ID, your W-9, the deed to your property, because they want to make sure you are who you say you are, you own the property, we manage it on your behalf, and everything looks pretty good, because there are certainly people who try to take advantage of these programs because they are oftentimes offering more than market rent. And some landlords just say, oh, easy money ticket, let me sign up, and then they don't really do their due diligence. We make sure that all of our leasing staff is trained on how to fill those out and make sure we can move through it as quickly as possible. Once they've kind of had some time to review the paperwork, make sure there are no gaps, they are conducting an inspection. And well, at this point, being a landlord, you have already had your property inspected with DCRA. You've passed that, you feel like my property is good to go. There is nothing anyone could find that would be an issue. DCHA comes in and says, that toilet's dirty, you're gonna fail. Because it just kind of depends who the inspector is, how they're feeling that day. They have been doing them virtually lately, which has been a blessing because I had one the other day, 5-bedroom house, huge. I could have been in there for an hour with an inspector, but I have him on my phone. He says, turn on that stove, open that window, show me a smoke detector. 5 minutes later, we're done. It also helps that we walk in, he can tell because Nest standards are high. Everything's freshly painted, everything's pretty updated. It doesn't seem like they need to worry about anything. They've also worked with us so often that can give us a little bit of leverage in pushing things through. But the inspection is the point where if you were going to be able to say no, this would be your point. In the case where a property might fail for something that it would be such an expense for you to fix the issue that you just can't afford it. And it's reasonable to say, sorry, I can't move forward because you're asking me to repaint the entire outside of a condo building. We had an owner where he owned one condo in a condo building. Obviously, you aren't responsible for the common elements of your building, but there was chipping paint outside. They take lead paint very seriously. And it wasn't his responsibility to fix, it wasn't part of his unit, but he said, hey, I want to get this person in. It's going to be worth it for both of us. He had the entire building repainted, which is the most generous thing I think I've seen in one of these processes. And then they said, all right, now that you went above and beyond, you've passed. For the most part, we don't see them fail big ticket things. It's pretty rare, but it will happen. So that's the point where you could kind of bow out, but usually it's minor things we can take care of pretty easily for you. They will let you know the day of if you've passed, if you haven't, if you need to do a reinspection after fixing things. And then usually pretty quickly, maybe a week after that, they'll send us a contract. The contract is between Nest on your behalf with the city to say, this is the amount we're paying you. Are we also paying the deposit or not? And just really to go over the financials and to really reinforce that while they have this relationship with Nest and they have a relationship with the tenant, we're still sending the same lease. We're still enforcing our lease terms. That's still our responsibility. Once we have that from them, we send out our lease, and generally that all kind of happens very quickly right before a tenant moves in. There are times where this process is even more condensed because, like Quentin mentioned, if somebody has serious need, if they're coming out of a shelter, for example, if they're coming out of a violent situation, they will be prioritized. And this might all happen in 2 weeks because they'll say, this person really needs a home right away. We're going to get them in. And those are great situations for us in the sense that we know you're going to get a lease soon and you won't have to deal with a long vacancy. And I'm going to pause just in case there are any questions coming through Esser about this process. If not.
Nothing yet in the chat, but if anyone does have any questions, feel free to shoot it in there and we're happy to answer.
If not, we'll have time at the end. And I will actually go ahead and pass it over to Mercedes to talk about her work at my sister's place.
Great, thank you. So at my sister's place, we have a couple of transitional housing programs. We have Rise Plus, and Frsp is really a city program, rapid rehousing program, where we provide case management. So we're housing families and single people who have experienced domestic violence. And through our RISE program, we pay the rent for a full year. It's great to find a place that utilities are included in rent because we'll pay for that as well. We also help in paying for any application fees and security deposits. And that's usually all the financial support we provide. At this point, our clients are in a position to pay utilities or other expenses. And the program, although it's for 1 year, we do offer extensions on a case-by-case basis. So during COVID, we have been offering a whole bunch of extensions because clients who had jobs, either lost jobs or had to stay home to care for kids. So there was, a real need for extensions, and we're really good about doing that. The one thing to keep in mind as a landlord, when you have a client who's a domestic violence survivor, they have additional rights as a DV survivor. And if for some reason they are in fear their abuser has found them, they do have the right to leave the property, with that 30-day notice and leave quickly. We've never had that happen, but it is something to keep in mind. Rise Plus, we just started earlier this year with a big grant from HUD, and it's similar to Rise, but it's actually for 2 years. And part of it is rapid rehousing. And when I talk about rapid rehousing, that means we're not providing 100% of the rent. We're providing kind of a step down as the clients are able to provide more of their rental support. But it's not always a straight line, and the program accommodates for that. So it could be that a client is able to provide more and more rent, but then they lose their job. Then we come back and we provide full rent. But both, the ultimate goal is to get the clients in a position where they can take over their own rent, either in the unit or in a new unit. In our program, we are not the leaseholders. We ask the landlords to sign a lease with the client as a way to help them build that rental history. But we also sign an MOU with landlords to let them know that MSP is covering that rent. And then also to kind of give them a little bit of education about our program. And so we aim to educate the landlords, but also educate our clients who oftentimes it's going to be the first time they're in an apartment and don't know anything about their tenant rights. So we work really closely with the Office of the Tenant Advocate to provide that education. So the whole purpose is to get these families or single people to learn how to be a good tenant, what their responsibilities are, what their rights are, and then build that income so that they can take over. And we have case managers that work with them very intensively to make sure that they're meeting their goals to be able to do that. Frsp is actually a program that is funded through the city. It's Family Rehousing Stabilization Program. And what the city does is provide funds for our case managers to work with the families that are housed through Frsp. So I'm sure, I know I read, and you all probably read, I think it was in the Washington Post, probably more than one article where the city, was in a big rush to do this housing first and get people housed, but not providing that case management to make them successful in housing. So that's what we're doing through this Frsp program. In addition to providing rent and case management and all those supportive services, we have a moving program, which is many of our clients are coming from our shelter and they have left their homes with what they can carry. So when we come to them and we say, great, you've been accepted into our RISE program, you can move into this 2-bedroom unit, we were finding that they were staying at our shelter because they literally did not have a bed to sleep on. And so to address that, we began to partner with another agency that was bringing volunteers together and bringing donated furniture together to fully furnish apartments. And then we quickly realized that that was something we needed to do in-house because they didn't have the capacity to deal with all the clients that we had to serve. So in DC, I'm sure you all know, if you put something in the Cleveland Park listserv, there are like 1 million people who are renovating or redecorating, and we put out a call for couches, whatever it might be, and are just overwhelmed by the generosity of this, great furniture, household goods, towels, kitchen, pots and pans, and things like that. So we have storage units where we have all of this furniture so that we present a client with an apartment. It's not just a vacant apartment. It's literally a fully furnished, decorated apartment where we bring volunteers to put it all together. So they're ready to go. And then the Fresh Start Fund kind of goes hand in hand with that. It's literally just money that is available to support our clients with one-time needs that can destabilize their housing. So if they get a really large utility bill that they weren't planning for, or their car breaks down, and if they can't fix their car, they can't go to work, they apply to get funding for these one-time issues or expenses that we know if we provide it, it's going to keep them stably housed. And then Aftercare is really just, my sister's place has a commitment to our clients. If you've been through our programs, we are always there for you. So we provide ongoing support regardless of whether you're in one of our residential programs or not. We're always there to support our clients with counseling or connecting them to resources. And so we really take a holistic approach to supporting our clients and making sure they're successful. And the number one thing is obviously to have safe, stable housing. And we really try to work with landlords. We have many landlords that have housed several of our clients because it's been a really good relationship. They know that they're going to get their check on time every month. And when one client moves out, we always have a long list of clients that can move in as well. So we're really proud of our work. And we actually did have a client housed through Nest in the Nest property. That was, I don't know how it came about, but I just remember signing checks to Nest. So that was really cool. So I look forward to working with you guys in these programs and providing housing to these families that so desperately need it.
Thank you. And I think we have seen more and more, especially during the pandemic when rents have been hit so hard, some owners wanting to work with us and just say, I specifically want to work with folks using rental assistance because it's stable. I can probably get a little bit more money. I don't have to turn the unit over after a year. And that's been really great because we've been able to, since we do have so many people reach out to us organically who are using vouchers, we can, to a certain extent, match people up with the right property and say, hey, if you want to set your property aside, work with this person, we've got somebody interested. And that's been really great to see people just have so much engagement with that. And yeah, and it's essential because to have programs like My Sister's Place that offer the holistic view, because I think the main ones you hear about do have some things lacking, and sometimes they don't provide the same, they definitely don't provide the same level of support for people to get to that self-sufficiency. Just to talk about the benefits a little bit more for you as a property owner, we've touched on most of this already, but I have a little chart here just to show you. I live in Eckington, and a 3-bedroom house in my neighborhood, probably not going to go for more than $3,400 if it's like newly renovated, pretty nice. If you're renting it and getting paid through DC Housing, they'll pay you $4,000. That could be $1,000 more than you'd normally be looking at. That is a huge bump. Not every neighborhood is the same. There are some neighborhoods that still what the city pays hasn't caught up with what you'd get on the market, but most of the time it's more. And also it depends on the client. If they have a need, if they need a 5-bedroom house and the only 5-bedroom house they can find is $500 more a month than DC would normally pay, that program might be able to say, hey, we'll actually match it because we need to get this person in somewhere. And this is the only place that fits. So you never know. It can definitely work out that they will match things just depending on the situation. A lot of it is super circumstantial. And again, tenants will often stay for a few years at a time. I can't think of anybody we've had who's using rental assistance who's been in a property of ours for less than a couple of years. It's usually quite a bit longer than that. Oftentimes folks are coming with children and they want to be in a good school district for a while until, you know, some of the kids have gotten old enough that they're moving out. So it's always kind of nice to see those long-term tenants stay with us. And as Mercedes mentioned, you will get that rent on the 1st of every month. It will be on time. You do not have to worry about late payments because this is coming directly from the city, and that is income you can count on being very stable. And lastly, and you know, one of the most important benefits in our mind is you are providing housing to someone in need and helping them get a stable home to be able to move towards self-sufficiency, providing a safe space they might not have otherwise had, and just giving them a good living experience. And I'm going to post up some frequently asked questions in case they spark that you all might have. If not, we're happy to go through these one by one because we do get asked them a lot. But if anybody has anything other than this, we can definitely go through it. Does anyone not want me to go through these lines? I would say, and Quentin, I'll let you take a couple of these. I'd say a question that we get a lot is simply just because people aren't informed, they will ask us if they can choose not to participate. The answer is no, as Quentin mentioned on that second or third slide. It is a protected class source of income. So if somebody is applying with rental assistance, you do need to move forward with their application as you would with anybody else. It is not something that you can just say, I'm ducking out of this, which is why they changed that legislation to say this language needs to be in your listing, because there are many management companies that have ducked around it in their own way. And our Attorney General has been cracking down on that, and you do not want to be caught in his gaze, because this you know, housing justice is something that's being taken very seriously, as well as a lack of affordable housing in the city. So they are putting that requirement in so that people know when they reach out, they have to be accepted. As long as they pass your application process, that still gets to be in play as well. Quentin, do you want to take, I think we just covered the higher rental amount question. Do you want to take the next one?
Sure. What if my property needs a lot of work? And I think you touched on that, Lydia, when you were talking about the process. You know, I think the city does make efforts to be reasonable to property owners. I mean, if they're not going to force you to do, you know, $30,000 worth of work to your property to have, you know, a rental assistance tenant come in. If it's something that is unreasonable and just won't work for you, for your bottom line, then I think there is room to say, hey, at this point in the process, we don't want to move forward and we don't want to do the work and bow out, like you mentioned. But if it's something that is smaller and can be taken care of pretty easily, then, you know, that's a different story. And I think as a company, Nest, we would work with you to kind of talk that through and really help you look at, you know, which situation you're facing in that regard. So.
And I think we touched on screening requirements being basically essentially the same. Next thing we get asked a lot is, because there are some tenants that do have to pay a portion of their rent depending on what program they're with, what if that portion of the rent goes unpaid? And that does not happen often because we are still requiring folks to go through our screening. So we are seeing that they have a good rental history, they have a decent credit history. You can no longer deny people based on credit score, but you can look at their credit history. So if we see that it's concerning, we have a very thorough and holistic screening tool that we use to check that and make sure that they meet our requirements. So it is pretty rare that this happens. Usually, occasionally folks will have a month where, maybe they get a little bit behind, but usually their portion of the rent is pretty minimal. So if you're still getting, 70% or more of your rent paid by the city, hopefully that is not affecting you too much if it happens a couple of times, but I honestly do not see that often. I think clients in these programs understand that they can be kicked out of some of these programs if they don't comply with the lease, and they have a case manager working with them to make sure that they are complying, everything's going well. If we have any complaints, that's where the mediation process starts. We don't immediately jump to eviction. We say, okay, can we work with your case manager, and what is the issue, and how do we solve for that? The other question we do get a lot is, what if I need to sell or move back in? And it is honestly not too different than with any other tenant when you need to sell or move back in. If you aren't familiar with that process, it can be complicated in the city because it's so tenant friendly. Basically, tenants are in your property, it's their home. If you need to move back in, you have to give them 90 days notice. The same thing would apply to somebody with a voucher. There's a slight difference where you kind of need to expect to be more flexible because they can't just up and move to any property. They have to go through this process again with a property that's going to get inspected and pass. And so that can add some time, but so it's something to keep in mind. But that can also be dragged out by your average tenant too, who refuses to move out when you need to move in. And that's not something I've ever seen when we give tenants that notice, since it's pretty generous. They understand they need to leave. But just a note on, if you didn't already know how tenant friendly DC law is, that is just something to keep in mind. But we've certainly had a lot of people move in back into their properties this year during the pandemic, and all has gone smoothly. And the last one, Quentin, do you want to take that? Sure.
I think that question is applicable to any tenant that you have in your space. And in all honesty, a lot of the applicants or tenants that I've worked with through the rental assistance programs take it very seriously, and they do understand that they do need to be good tenants and generally try their best to be. So I think that I would say there's no real definitive answer to that question. I mean, I think it really is based on, we do our best to screen, and we do look at past rental history and contact previous landlords to so that we can actually get a verifiable sense of who we're leasing your home to. And I think that, for the most part, I haven't seen too many issues with, well-screened tenants moving into people's homes and leaving the property in worse condition than they originally came. So.
And that is it for our slides. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you learned a little bit about these programs if you haven't worked with them before. It can be a really definitely rewarding experience, and there's just always so much to learn. So thank you, Mercedes, also for going through some of the very specific things that My Sister's Place offers, because I think that's such a great organization.